I read an article in the Washington Post today that was so shocking and so upsetting that I decided it's worth me amplifying it through a hot take, because I think everybody needs to know exactly what is happening and what Donald Trump is planning to do. What it says is that if Trump wins the presidency in 2024, he's going to plot revenge against his opponents and anyone he views to be an enemy. And why is this a disaster for the rule of law? This Washington Post article dated November 6, 2023 is about as shocking and alarming as anything I can read as somebody who spent her entire career upholding the rule of law. I was a prosecutor for 3 decades, and I can't tell you what it means to have a nonpartisan prosecution and law enforcement and judicial branch, whatever you want to call it. It needs to be independent. This is why the framers of the Constitution created the 3 different branches of government. They were supposed to be separate but equal. You have the executive branch, which is the president and all of his agencies that he appoints. You've got the judicial branch, which is the judges. And then you've got the legislative branch, which is Congress and the Senate. Now, although prosecutors and defense attorneys who are public defenders, but although prosecutors technically are in the executive branch, I shouldn't say technically, they are in the executive branch, not the judicial branch, believe it or not, they still work within the judicial branch, meaning the rules, the Congress passes the laws, right? The prosecutor, who's part of the executive branch, enforces the laws that Congress passes. And the courts, what they do is they rule on the law, whether or not it was interpreted correctly, applied correctly, et cetera. And so it's very important that these things are all independent of each other, and that politics has nothing to do with the justice system, whether it comes from the side of prosecution or the side of the judicial branch. And why is this? Let's break this down. So what really is just alarming and shocking about this to me first is, while you had Chris Christie and Nikki Haley and, Ron DeSantis and others all on stage having the debate on issues, right, for the third Republican debate that Donald Trump couldn't be bothered to show up for, instead had his own competing event next door. Why? Because I would say he's a coward and doesn't want to discuss issues with other people. He just wants to talk at you and not listen. And, maybe he was so threatened by them that he had to try to take away attention from them. Who knows? But while they were up on stage actually debating issues like abortion, the economy, I might not agree with their position on most things, but I do appreciate that they remember that it's about us, right? If they run for office and they're president, it's about the economy. It's about, it's about all of us. It's about how our lives are going to be. They work for us. It's not about them, and it's not a power grab for them. So I did appreciate, and do appreciate that at least they're doing that. And whereas Trump, on the other hand, and his, brain trust, rather than thinking about how they can do things for, the United States of America, they're plotting their revenge. And, this is going to sound really dramatic, but it reminds me of a time when the World Trade Center, I'm sure most people remember this, but for people who are too young to remember this, years before 9/11 in 2001, years before that, the World Trade Center, there was a bombing in the World Trade Center where the terrorists tried to bomb it from the ground up. They drove a truck in and bombed it, and a handful of people died, and it was pretty sad and terrible that it happened, but everyone kind of went on with their life. And I remember there was a group of people talking about this, and Christian Amanpour, who's somebody who is a very intelligent, smart journalist who currently, I think, works for CNN. But at the time, she wrote an article, I think it was for Vanity Fair, where she basically was saying, do you think that these terrorists are going to go away? No, they are here. They are going to try again. There are these camps, these terror camps out there that are plotting their revenge, and they're going to try to do it again. And of course they did. And this reminds me of what is happening here. Okay. You've got something called Project 2025. Okay. This is comprised, and this is all from the Washington Post article. Project 2025 is comprised of 75 groups. Okay. So it's not like just a few people, 75 groups of people. It's organized by the Heritage Foundation. Okay. And their entire reason to be, and what they are doing is they are creating a list of people that they plan to investigate or prosecute if Donald Trump becomes president. These are people who don't like what happened. Their failed attempt to steal an election before. So they are spending this time to plot how to do it next time, right? That's what they're doing. That's why it reminds me, that's why I say it's like a terrorist group, because these people are like a terrorist group. And I'm not one to typically be so histrionic, but it really, when you hear what they are plotting, this literally could be the end of our democracy as we know it. So number one, they plan to invoke the Insurrection Act to allow Donald Trump to deploy the military against any civil demonstrations, right? That's part of the foundation, the bedrock of our company, that we're allowed to peaceably assemble. We are allowed to demonstrate. We are allowed to voice our opinions. If there's any demonstrations by anyone, if Donald Trump wins this election, he's going to deploy the military. Okay. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to have the Department of Justice investigate one-time officials and allies who've become critical to his time in office, including people like Bill Barr, John Kelly, Ty Cobb, his ex-attorney, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. And they're going to appoint a special prosecutor to go after Biden and his family for what they say is corruption. Now, why is this dangerous? Because policy and practice has always shielded prosecutions from political considerations, right? And, you don't ever want to infect prosecutions with politics. And it's such a bedrock of the foundation of our society that there are so many phrases that have become trite, but they're so overused, but it's because it's so embedded in the fabric of what we do. Justice is blind, separation of powers, follow the facts wherever they lead. That's what we do as prosecutors. Prosecutors are apolitical. They prosecute without fear or favor, right? Those are words that we probably overuse, but it's because they are so true. And having lived it, that is how prosecutors work. They literally follow the facts wherever they lead. It doesn't matter whether you like the person or dislike the person, right? Justice truly has to be blind. And, the fact that Donald Trump has outsourced to a right-wing think tank in Washington, D.C., this Project 2025, to develop a plan to draft these executive orders that would deploy the military under the Insurrection Act, right, is just stunning to me. And that they are making a list of people they're going to seek revenge on. I mean, this notion of keeping politics out of prosecution is so separate and so important and such a part of like the DNA of law enforcement, that this is why when Joe Biden was, when there was an investigation and allegations about his own son, Hunter, he appointed a special counsel. And he only recently appointed made him actually special counsel, but he allowed someone to be the chief investigator who was a Trump appointee. David Weiss was a Trump appointee. He was a United States attorney under Trump. And you know what Biden could have done? He could have said, it's my son. I'm going to put in someone who's going to be loyal to me because that's what I want, right? But instead he said, no, I'm not going to do that because that is not the way justice works. I'm going to appoint someone who is neutral. And in fact, somebody who's not on my side, follow the facts, see where they go. And I'm going to keep someone who was a Trump appointee so nobody can convince can try to accuse me of appointing someone to try to tip the scales. But of course, when David Weiss doesn't find much more than what he has and was going to make a deal to prosecute, that the deal that fell apart for the gun and the taxes, everyone still accused David Weiss of somehow being on the take, even though he's a Trump guy. It made no sense to me. But that's why it's so important to be honorable and keep it separate. But you know what? That's not what Trump would do. That's what Biden did, because that's what people do, because that's what's so important. Now, Trump's number one priority, that they have said, is that he's going to pick an attorney general. And guess who's leading the charge on that? Jeffrey Clark. Jeffrey Clark, who's none other than one of the co-conspirators in Jack Smith's DC case and a current defendant in Fani Willis's Georgia indictment. And he's the guy described in the federal indictment as a deputy White House counsel who, I'm sorry, in one conversation, I have this written down, in one conversation described in the federal indictment, a deputy White House counsel warned Jeffrey Clark that Trump's refusing to leave office would lead to riots in every major city. And Clark responded, according to the indictment, that's why there's an Insurrection Act. Jeffrey Clark was the environmental guy who worked for the DOJ, who, after Trump had lost the election and after they were literally about to hand over the country to Joe Biden, he was going to appoint Jeffrey Clark as Attorney General in those waning days to try to get him to somehow help steal the election from the American people. So it is so dangerous for Donald Trump to be plotting his revenge against people who he views as his enemies, because it has nothing to do with actual facts about whether they're guilty of any crimes, right? It's like he wants to go after the person, not the crime or not the offense, if there is one. And the fact that he's going to appoint an attorney general who's all about just doing Trump's bidding and, vindicating his grudges. It's not about us. It's about Trump, and it's all about Trump. That's all he cares about. And it's just very, very dangerous for the law enforcement community, for the criminal justice community, and for just, the rule of law in general. So I just wanted to highlight this, and hopefully everybody will just amplify this really important article that was written. I'm Karen Friedman Agnifilo with Legal AF. Thanks so much for joining.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.